Hello, bros. We're back with Funeral Customs and Their Origin and Development by Bertrand S. Puckle. Not Puckhole, but Puckle. That's too many books under there. Let's do this. Is that enough? Maybe I do need the third. Maybe I do need that, bruv. Right, let me turn this light on. Chapter 3. Preparation for burial, coffins, grave goods, sati. I'm not sure what sati is or how it's pronounced, but that's what we're going with. In order to follow the various burial customs as clearly as possible, we will consider them in their natural sequence. Death has taken place with or without such a supernatural warning as we have noted in a previous chapter, and precautions have been taken, we will hope, to ascertain that what was once a human being is now a lifeless corpse. An expression that we may use without tautology. Whilst the word corpse is now accepted as denoting a dead body, it was at one time as often used in describing the living, of which Trench gives the following examples. A valiant corpse where force and beauty met. And that's from Select Glossary. Women and maids shall particularly examine themselves about the variety of their apparel. Their too much care of their corpse. And that was from On the Death of Sir R. Wyatt. Or maybe that was the third one. I don't know. Doesn't matter. When the soul or personality goes away, leaving the body behind, it severs all association with the remains, which become a public charge with an implied obligation on the relatives. Should they, however, for one reason or another refuse it, burial, any stranger may undertake that duty and recover the cost from the estate of the deceased by law. The only way that a person in this country can assure his wishes being carried out in respect of a particular form of burial is by leaving his property to friends or relatives conditionally upon his expressed desire being respected. Although it is, of course, still open to such a person to refuse the legacy and act in the matter according to his lights, this is not infrequently done in cases of a difference of religious opinions. An amusing case of avarice versus religious convictions will be found in a chapter on cremation, whatever you want to say. It cannot too strongly be insisted upon when we compare the practices of the past with the present, that the very customs to which we cling so unreasonably are, for the most part, unworthy remnants of superstitious rites, and not anything dictated by any form of Christian religion to which we may subscribe. This is important because we can readily trace the continuity of such usages in the absence of any sort of authority for what we do, to the accepted and erroneous belief that they are associated in some way with articles of faith, which it would be impious to rough handle. Thus they have been handed down from generation to generation, impervious even to ridicule, and carefully fostered by the dismal trader. Let us look, for instance, at the demands of the Roman Catholic Church as representing a body of Christians who, employing an elaborate ritual, might impose such customs upon their followers. 1. That the body be decently laid out. 2. The lights be placed beside the body. 3. That a cross be laid upon the breast, or failing that, the hands laid on the breast in the form of a cross. 4. that the body be sprinkled with holy water and incensed at stated times. 5. That it be buried in consecrated ground. Here we have certain observances decreed which have no relation to mourning weeds, floral offerings, funeral repasts, plumed hearses, or tombstones, whilst as far as ceremony is concerned, they merely apply to the dead those rites which are rightly or wrongly enjoined for the living. What do you got, Brobs? The wearing of the cross, for example, the recognized symbol of the Christian faith, the use of lights, incense, and holy water are but the common practice of Catholicism. There is one thing which the Catholic Church does not allow as being historically against the Christian practice, and this is cremation. If we go back to the earliest Christian times, we find certain decrees issued in relation to the burial of the dead, but still no mention of the trappings of the trade. In the days of Constantine, companies of functionaries were established with definite duties of charity to the dead. They worked in groups under the general supervision of the decani. Decani? I don't know how to say it. Or overseers. Some were charged to prepare for the religious procession, others to carry the bier or the bier, whilst it was the duty of yet another group to lift the body and dig the grave. Laws were also made at the same period to secure all expenses against overcharge. Every person who needed it was to have a coffin without payment, whilst even the poorest were to be followed to the grave by a cross-bearer, light monks, and 3 acolytes. The funeral banquet and abuse which on various pretexts was creeping in was also banned by the church. The Council of Auxerre forbade the ceremonial kiss given to the dead by the priest and the practice of dressing the body in rich garments. Certain Jewish customs were adopted by the church as pious practices, as distinguished from articles of faith because of their association with the burial of their divine founder. An instance of this is the ceremonious cleansing of the body after death. Saint Chrysostom writes of this as being hallowed in the person of our Lord, whose body was washed as soon as it was taken from the cross. To the Christians, this Jewish custom, the special obligation of a son to his father's body, signified that the dead, freed from the stain of sin by the sacraments, might be received into heaven, where no unclean thing may enter. The charitable Saint Martin took particular care to search out the dead bodies of the poor and destitute, and we are told never failed of washing them with fair water. Jewish funeral customs are sufficiently interesting to call for special consideration, and it would not perhaps be generally supposed that simplicity was the keynote enjoined for a people who notoriously loved display, nor can we fasten on them our stupid pagan survivals. It is strictly ordained that there must be no adornment of the plain wooden coffin used by the Jew, nor many flowers be placed inside or outside. Plumes, velvet palls, and the like are strictly prohibited, and all show and display of wealth discouraged. Moreover, the synagogue holds itself responsible for the arrangements for burial, dispensing with the services of the dismal trade. Fixed and reasonable charges are made for services rendered. For anything like this admirable commercial undertaking, we must look in our own country to the olden days of the trade guilds. The guild supplied a hearse such as will be presently described, also a pall, bier, candles, etc. These articles were collectively owned and held always at the disposal of those of the fraternity who might have need of them. They might, moreover, be borrowed by the members for the use of friends, in which case a toll was taken of a certain quantity of wax, which would be made up into candles as required. In some parishes in England today, and mind you, this was back in 1928, a bier and a pall are still kept for the use of parishioners, to which was added at one time a coffin, in which the shrouded body was carried to the grave, and from whence it would be removed at the graveside, the coffin being returned for a further occasion. No doubt the origin of the custom of washing, anointing, and clothing the corpse in garments suitable to its rank was instituted in the dim ages, when it was believed that the departed required such attention to enable them to appear at their best in a future material state. Handed down to later times, the Christian put his own interpretations to the practice which he had adopted. The primary doctrine of the resurrection of the body, somewhat crudely interpreted, presupposed the resurrection of the clothes by the old force of associated ideas. This led to a continuance of a tradition which we have by no means forsaken today. Thus we still array in their robes of office kings, monks, nuns, and priests, as well as soldiers, statesmen, and others who wear a distinctive dress, whilst on the continent great satisfaction has been derived from the thought of appearing before the Creator in the inevitable evening dress, apparently with a view to impressing him with a sense of the social standing of his creatures so arrayed. As a somewhat happy contrast to this, one is inclined to admire the humility of the Greek church, whose religious are buried naked with the exception of a haircloth as a sign of a life of penance. Wonder if that still holds true. In the matter of dressing the dead, the same customs do not apply everywhere. Some only cover the body with a winding sheet, with the exception of the priests, who are robed in their ecclesiastical ornaments, as the bodies of the martyrs were ordered to be arrayed in a fair surplice, or surplice, I'm not sure how to say it. Pope Gregory even finds fault with some of his predecessors for having such honors done to their bodies, which were the special privilege of the martyrs. In Italy, the dead were wrapped in the cloaks they wore in life, which was considered honorable and done in the first century. Murat further reminds us that it was an ancient Christian custom to perfume the body in commemoration of the spices in which the body of the Savior was wrapped, and that the pagans who much prized perfume and used it in their religious rites and copiously on their bodies much chided the Christians for wasting precious ointments on their dead at the expense of the living. In China, where rank is so deeply respected, the clothing of the dead is a very costly and elaborate proceeding. According to social standing, the corpse must be provided with anything up to the 50 suits due to a ruler, for whom upper and lower garments are used. The student comes in for a rich assortment of black silk robes in recognition of his learning, which is held very honorably by the Chinese. It is hardly necessary to add that despite the liberal contributions of friends known as helps, a family is frequently ruined, as is sometimes the case in our own country, in paying what are supposed to be proper marks of respect to their deceased relatives. Whilst the most expensive thing about a man in China is his funeral, the least expensive is that of a child. During the old regime, parents frequently wrapped the dead infants in lengths of matting and laid them at certain street corners where a man passed with a black cart drawn by a black cow every morning and collected them for burial. In early days in England, the bodies of the poor were committed to the grave practically naked, or at best wrapped in a shroud of linen and only the prosperous were allowed to be chested, as it was called. Cox mentions a curious instance of this as late as 1608, when one John Scarry, a poor man that died in the place stable, Poynting, Surrey, and being brought half naked with his face bare, the parson would not bury him so, but first he gave a sheet and caused him to be sacked therein, and they buried him more Christian like, being much grieved to see him brought so unto the grave. And at this time did one Thatcher dwell at the place, or manor house. In the year 1666, an act came into force insisting that all persons should be buried in a shroud composed of woolen material in place of linen previously used. It would seem that this new law was easily and frequently evaded, for in the year 1678 and again in 1680 it was found necessary to amend it. A provision was added that a certificate must be given by the relative of the deceased person in the form of an affidavit declaring that a woolen shroud had been used at the burial. If we compare the population of England at that period with the population today, the impetus which this law gave to the paper trade, which it was designed to assist, is very remarkable. I'm reading a book called Funeral Customs, and we're on the section about preparation for burial. It will also give some idea of the value of the costly hardwoods and metal which we consign to the earth every year. We are told that as a result of this law, it was computed that no less than 200,000 pounds of rag were saved from corruption in the grave. In order to enforce the regulations, a heavy fine was imposed for non-compliance, but the gay decking of the corpse is a custom which dies hard, and persons of means were often found to pay the penalty rather than submit to what they considered an indignity. The parish churches were obliged to keep a special register of burials for the purpose, and an affidavit had to be made before a justice of the peace or a clergyman that the new law had been duly complied with. The certificate was signed by 2 witnesses. A bait was offered, consisting of a part of the fine, to any informer who could produce evidence that the act in any particular case had been evaded. These laws were not repealed till the reign of George III, 1814. In the year 1700, there appears an entry in the parish register of and I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced, but that the executors of one Thomas Day were fined £5 for burying a body wrapped in linen. Cox gives the following extracts from one of the special registers. Well wrapped in a shirt of woolen, and was let down into his dormitory with the vestment about his corpse, to the great satisfaction of the law enjoining that habiliment as convenient for the dead. Francis Pickering's was shrouded only in a winding sheet made of the fleece of good fat mutton, for the same reason that it was once the custom in Ireland to remove the nails from the coffin immediately before lowering it into the grave, in order that the dead might have no difficulty in freeing themselves on the day of resurrection. So we find that the shroud or winding sheet was often loosened from the feet and hands, lest its tight folds should prevent a speedy egress at the all important moment. A special costume for burial was provided, and in some cases prepared during life by the women, so that there might be no doubt about its being ready when required at death. The Norwegian peasant makes her burial garments from a special material and reverently hoards it up for use at her death. whilst not infrequently in this country poor women who are forced by circumstances to spend their last days in the workhouse take with them a nightdress and a pair of white stockings in order that they may appear respectable at their death. The following is a description of a curious ancient Jewish dress for a corpse in the 17th century. A special pair of drawers was made by women who did this work as a charity. After this had been put on the body, a skirt was added, a frill of fine linen, a tailed or cloak, square in form with ribbons suspended, and on the head a white cap. The white stockings are still considered in certain spheres of life as fitting for the special use of the dead. The following incident will show, which recently came to the writer's notice. A little girl whose mother kept a small linen draper's shop in London was invited to a children's party. Her scanty wardrobe contained a muslin frock suitable to the occasion, but her heart was set on a pair of white stockings to complete the effect. Having seen the necessity stocked for sale in the shop, she ventured to ask for the loan of a pair, a request that was angrily refused by her mother, who explained that they were sold only for the use of the dead. In England, till the middle of the 16th century, it was ordained by the church that if a child should die within a month of its baptism, it must be buried in its chrism. The chrism was the prototype of the baptismal rose. Jesus. The chrism was the prototype of the baptismal robe. It was originally made in such a way that the priest might readily anoint the infant with the chrism or holy oil used at baptism with the sign of the cross between the shoulders and on the breast. This garment was worn till the 7th day to protect the places so anointed, or till such time as the mother was churched. For the same purpose, a band of linen was at one time bound round the head of children and kept there for 8 days after confirmation, of which the white band, often worn by boys round the arm when they are confirmed, is a probable survival. In the event of the child dying before the stated time, it was known as a chrism child, and it was decreed that it should be buried in its chrism, bound round the body by swaddling bands in place of the shroud. It might be mentioned here that whilst we generally associate swaddling clothes with children, it was once a term used to describe the strips of material bound round the shroud of children or adults. There are a few memorial brasses to be found in our churches depicting chrism children shrouded in this curious manner. The burial of children has always differed in some ways from that of adults. The Romans, for instance, buried them in the ground under the eaves of their houses because it was thought that the infant spirit, being near its parents, would not walk as it otherwise might do if interfered from its home. Maybe I need some water here. For the same reason, even today, we generally bury the body of a very young or unchristened child in the coffin of a woman adult, in order that the little ghost may not torment its parents with her reproachful lamentings. For the origin of the practice, has nothing to do with the mere economy of burial charges. We saw that the Chinese wrapped their dead babes in old matting, but something very similar has been done much nearer home. In France, some years before the Revolution, de Braz tells us that the parents of a dead child used to make a little receptacle for its body by stripping the bark from a chestnut tree, which they bound round the infant with broom. So common was the habit that it became necessary to pass a law making the priest the responsible person to see that a practice which ruined so many trees was discontinued. The priest of each parish was instructed to announce the new regulations from the pulpit in the various provinces. The penalty for non-compliance was a very heavy fine. This bark shroud or coffin was an instance of the use of something which answered both purposes. Binding the body with reeds or sewing it up in the hide of an animal are other instances. The body of Henry I was salted to preserve it and sewn into an ox hide and brought to England for burial. Cox reminds us that the Book of Common Prayer certainly anticipates uncoffined burial, as the word coffin is not even mentioned, reference being made only to the corpse or the body. Thus, the earth shall be cast upon the body. In Wheatley's book on the Common Prayer, 1710, occurs the comment, when the body is stripped of all but its grave clothes, and is going to be put into the grave, etc., a trace of interment without a coffin at the present day may be found in the traditional rites of the Orthodox gypsy, who prefers to be shrouded in his best suit of clothes, turned inside out, and buried at the crossroad or under a hedge with no other covering. That chested burial was at one time considered as an attribute of wealth or social standing may be gathered from the following ancient regulation taken from the records of the historic town of Rye, Sussex. In the year 1850, the city fathers decreed that no person who shall die within the port of Rye under the degree of mayor, jurat, or common councilman, or of their wives, except such person as the mayor shall give license for, and being paid to the mayor for the use of the poor, shall be chested or coffined to their burial. And if any carpenter or joiner make any chest or coffin for any person to be buried other than for the persons aforesaid excepted, he shall be fined 10 shillings for every coffin so made by him. When a coffin was used for the poor, it was only for the purposes of conveying the corpse from the house where the death took place to the graveside. There the body would be removed and placed in the grave, covered only by the shroud or winding sheet. In Scotland, about the 16th century, a kind of combined coffin and bier was in use. It consisted of a wooden receptacle, one side of which was hinged as a lid, from which the corpse was removed and lowered into the grave by means of ropes. Andrews also describes the death hamper, as it was called, where it was in use in some parts of the Highlands. 3 pairs of loop handles were provided, through which iron bars were passed to enable it to be conveniently carried. After it had been lowered into the grave, it was turned over to relieve it of its load and brought to the surface again for use on a future occasion. Simpler still was a contrivance once used in Brittany. It consisted of a top and bottom plank, one over and one supporting the body. Blocks of wood held them together, 2 being nailed close to the neck of the corpse, 2 under the arms and 2 near the ankles, thus forming a rough crate without sides rather than a chest. To chest or place the body in a coffin is an expression frequently to be met with in early English records. Thus we read in the Bible, he, Joseph, dieth and is chested. In countries where earth burial could be avoided, A coffin would be of little importance in preserving the body from decay. A natural or artificial cave being used in which the body would rest on a ledge or shelf without any covering except the grave clothes. We find the cave habit perpetuated in the use of stone coffins, many examples of which have been unearthed in this country. When suitable materials were not available from which to construct such a coffin, small slabs of stone were built round about the body as a protection, such as we find in early Christian cemeteries. The stone coffin was indeed more nearly related to the tomb, for owing to its weight, it was not possible to conveniently carry it any distance so that the body could be brought to the coffin and deposited therein. Let us look for a moment at the origin of thus boxing the body instead of the simple practice of placing it, shrouded only, in direct contact with the earth. Undoubtedly, it originated in the attempt to preserve the corpse as long as possible from decay. And the reason for so doing was, in Christian countries anyway, the belief in a final material resurrection of the body. We have seen that the poor looked upon the coffin as a luxury, which had, in some instances, even been denied to them by law. It is still regarded by meaner minds as a symbol of social status and respectability, and the undertaker finds in the poorer districts a ready demand for the polished oak and gaudy furniture which is the pride of his profession. In support of this, the following true story was told by the late Canon Barnett. Some slum children were taken for a day's outing to the country, and later their experiences formed the subject of an essay at school. One little girl appeared to have been much impressed by the trees, and thus described the oak. From the oak tree is made coffins and other expensive articles. We can hardly believe that even the most bigoted could suppose that burial without a coffin tendered the poor at a disadvantage in answering the roll call on the day of judgment. For we have an example from the most orthodox source to disprove this. The Trappist monk, wrapped only in his habit for a shroud, with his head and face protected by his cowl, is reverently committed by his brothers to the earth in the little cemetery belonging to their order, without any coffin or other protection whatever. And this could hardly be the case if there was the slightest reason to suppose that its welfare in the future could state, in its future state, should be imperiled. Undoubtedly, the custom of preserving the body as long as possible from decay is one of those unauthoritative conventions which we follow without attempting to define our reasons or real feelings in the matter. Needless to say, the trade is all in favor of a substantial and beautiful casket to cast into the grave, with such expensive furniture fittings and linings as can be thrust upon the relatives at a time when they are not in their spirit to bargain. If we estimated the value of the oak, elm, and other valuable hardwoods which we commit to the earth every year, the rot and decay, to say nothing of the value of brass and other metal which goes with them, we must see how truly appalling is this waste. Our folly in this respect forms one of the soundest claims which the advocates of cremation put before us. From the purely utilitarian standpoint, taking the annual number of deaths in England and Wales as something like 260,000, translate that into pounds sterling, and you will have very largely underestimated the value of the wood alone, which is used for coffins during that period. Prodigal as we are in our use of timber for various commercial necessary purposes, which we ruthlessly destroy and never systematically replant, we at least manufacture articles which may perhaps last for generations, which wood used for coffins from a utilitarian standpoint may just as well have been burnt. Oh man. Even in a damp soil, a coffin made of oak or elm, with or without a leaden shell, will preserve the human's remains for a very considerably Jesus. Even in a damp soil, a coffin made of oak or elm, with or without a leaden shell, will preserve the human remains for a very considerable period, not considerably. Thank you. Elm is largely used both for economy and its peculiar properties of resisting the action of rot when in the ground. In light sandy soils, decomposition is a very much slower process. Some earth has the peculiar property of mummifying the body. The placing of antiseptic, carbolic sawdust, etc., in the coffin greatly tends to preservation, while the use of India rubber and other such expedients is the outcome of foolish sentiment, which seeks to delay the reasonable and inevitable courses of nature in reclaiming what she has lent to us. Not only are such practices illogical, but opposed to the laws of sanitation, nor are they warranted by any precept, civil or ecclesiastical. Whilst preservation, including the ancient science of embalming, is, except in certain rare cases, unnecessary and objectionable, we must not go to the opposite extreme and bury our dead with quicklime or corrosives, which might tend to render more difficult the detection of crime. Very large sums of money have been paid for costly coffins, elaborately carved and silver mounted, whilst the use of velvet, swansdown, paddings, and pinking show us a remnant of the hard dying belief that the dead are merely sleeping in their graves and require such material comforts. The Orthodox Jew believed this very really, and also that the actual process of decay was in the nature of a punishment, the pains of which the dead were called upon to endure in satisfaction of sins committed during their lifetime. We are not therefore surprised to find secret efforts often made with a view to shortening this unhappy period. Earth was placed in the coffin and holes bored in the wood to accelerate decomposition. Perhaps as a claim to special consideration, the Jews sometimes made their coffins from the boards of a table at which the poor had been fed. It has been said that the very custom to which we cling that are objectionable have no relation to any doctrine imposed upon us by our religious beliefs. The special preservation of the bodies of the dead, when carried beyond an occasional necessity, where certain diseases have produced an extremely rapid mortification, is all part of an ignorant, literal conception of the doctrine of the resurrection of the body. That such a materialistic conception was once very general is easy to determine. For instance, teeth were often carefully preserved as they were shed in the natural course of events during lifetime in order that they might eventually be buried with the body and, as dismembered parts, be readily available at the last day. If such precautions were necessary, the matter presents presents many problems, such as must have troubled the mind of the Sunday school scholar, who inquired in his perplexity where missionaries went to when they died, and being assured that they undoubtedly gained admission to the celestial state, the child asked if cannibals went to heaven also. The horrified teacher denied so liberal a doctrine. Well, then, what happens to the missionary who gets eaten by the cannibals? Was the logical response. Many cases are on record where a coffin has been purchased during the lifetime of a person of eccentric habits and often served as a bed in order that the owner might become accustomed to the use of the receptacle in which the body would repose during the long sleep. It is well known that Madame Sarah Bernhardt kept a coffin and was photographed in it in her boudoir. Whatever may have been the motive of the celebrated actress, others have done the same thing in the sense of self-repression, as the monks of some orders daily dig a spadeful of the earth, which is eventually to cover their remains, as an act of humility. I think I'm going to leave off there just because I'm tired. I know we're about halfway through this long chapter. What am I at? 41 minutes? Yeah, I'm not going further. That's all, bruvs. Goodbye. Goodbye, bruvs.